welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is my first deck tech from the Brothers War, and it is going to be Farid Enterprising Salvager, 2 and a red human soldier, 3/3. Whenever a non-token artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a colorless artifact token named Scrap. And you can pay 1 and a red, sacrifice an artifact, choose one, put a +1/+1 counter on Farid. It gains menace until end of turn, or goad target creature, or discard a card, then draw a card. I got real excited about this guy as I was talking about him in the spoiler video I did for a number of reasons. And the first one is because he has a really unique ability that we've never seen before, creating these scrap tokens. And just so everyone is aware, if you're looking at this card wondering what those scrap tokens do, they actually do literal nothing. And I don't know if they're going to make a token for this card or not. I made one myself. Here it is. Scrap. It does literal nothing. It is just an artifact token that sits on the battlefield doing nothing. But of course, you're going to use it for your commander's ability. And I really love the modal aspect of the commander's ability as well. So I like the whole sacrifice artifact theme. That actually isn't an off-color theme. Sacrificing artifacts is very much a red thing. There's a lot you can do there. And whenever you have those options on your commander, I think it is always going to make for an interesting build around. I will just say the whole goad target creature thing I didn't build around at all. For me, that is just a really nice defensive capability on your commander. If my opponent has a Blightsteel Colossus, that is when I'm going to choose to use that. And by the way, this ability can be used at instant speed. So even if my opponent does a through the breach type of effect, surprise, I got a Blightsteel Colossus, I'm about to kill you with it. As soon as they go to combat, you can now use this ability to go their Blightsteel Colossus, so they can't attack you. They have to attack someone else, right? So that is a really nice defensive ability to have on your commander that I like a lot. I'm more so built around the other two abilities, and of course, mostly I built around the whole sacrifice artifact theme because that's something you're going to be doing a whole lot. I put a couple other cards in here like Slowbad Goblin Tinkerer and Brea's Apprentice that have the repeatable sacrifice artifact ability so that we can be sacrificing all the other artifacts we have in the deck and also be sacrificing those scraps that we're making. Don't forget, every time we sacrifice an artifact, we're getting a scrap token, so that just gives us another artifact to sacrifice. And you're not always going to want to use your commander's ability there, so having a couple other options to be sacrificing those scrap tokens will be nice. A couple other auto includes, if you're in this theme, Pia's Revolution is a great one. 2 and a red enchantment. Whenever a non-token artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to your hand unless target opponent has Pia's Revolution, deal 3 damage to them. So I don't know how many people are familiar with this card. I definitely do not see it much in the commander format. It is very reminiscent of Athreos, right? The black-white god enchantment, except now we're applying this to artifacts. Of course, it doesn't work with token artifacts, so it doesn't work with the scrap tokens, but we have a ton of artifacts in this deck, and a lot of them are going to be going to the graveyard. Treasure Nabber, also an absolute must if you're in any sort of sacrifice artifact theme, because whenever an opponent taps an artifact for mana, you're going to gain control of it until the end of your next turn, which means, of course, you control it, so you can sacrifice it, right? We're getting some benefit out of it, but also, of course, our opponent is not getting them back, so that's going to be a fantastic fit in this deck. Of course, we have to do all that great artifact recursion stuff that red is really good at. I got Scrap Mastery here, Scrap Trawler as well. Of course, just an auto include if you're going to be doing any of that sacrifice artifact theme, or even if you're just in an artifact heavy deck at all, I think Scrap Trawler is a necessity. Of course, we got Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer, right? These are serving both of our needs here, where we're putting artifacts into our graveyard, which is going to give us the scrap token off of our commander, but also because we're sacrificing all these artifacts, now we can get them back. We can sacrifice a non-token artifact, get a scrap token, and then sacrifice that scrap token to, say, our Goblin Engineer to get back that artifact that we just sacrificed. Rinse and repeat. Lots of fantastic value here for sure. I also have Scrapyard Recombiner in here. 3 mana artifact creature construct. 0/0 with modular 2, so it's going to enter the battlefield with 2 counters on it. It's going to be a 2/2 creature. You're going to tap it and sacrifice an artifact, so it's fitting the artifact sacrifice theme, but you're going to search your library for a construct card, reveal it, and put it in your hand, then shuffle. I thought this was a really good fit, even though we're not necessarily in a construct tribal deck. deck, there is enough constructs in this deck. There's a few, not a ton, but there's enough so that we can take those scrap tokens, which are essentially useless, and turn them into something of value. A couple of great constructs, though, that I found that actually fit really good in the deck. Containment Construct, 2-mana artifact creature construct, 2/1. So we can go get this with our Scrapyard Recombiner, and whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn. Well, hey, that's a great fit with our commander's last ability there, where we are discarding and drawing. So now if we get our Containment Construct, every card we discard to our commander's ability, we can now play from our graveyard, so it essentially just becomes draw a card. Really interesting one, Slag Fiend. 1 red mana creature construct. That's right, it's not an artifact creature, it's just a regular old creature, except it's a construct. They actually changed this to Phyrexian Construct because I think the fact that this is a non-artifact creature construct doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Nevertheless, it is a construct, so we can go get it with our Scrapyard Recombiner, and its power and toughness is equal to the number of artifacts in all graveyards. This is a pretty good card. It's only 1 red mana, so later in the game, our graveyard's full with artifacts. Probably we have a lot of opponents that have artifacts in their graveyard as well. This can just be 1 mana 10/10 or something. Later in the game, it could be really nice to close things out with. Of course, we're going to want lots of artifacts in this deck, in particular the ones that are going to be sacrificing themselves, because when they do, we're going to get a scrap token, right? So Moonsilver Key, Mind Stone, these are cards that I probably would put in the deck anyway, but when we sacrifice our Moonsilver Key, that's an artifact going to the graveyard, we'll get a scrap token. We can sacrifice our Mind Stone to draw a card, get a scrap token, right? And then of course, because we're doing the recursion thing, we can maybe bring them back at a later date. Amaryllis Sphere, Ecologist Terrarium, these are just great land options, right? We need this kind of stuff in our deck anyway, but these are artifacts that will sacrifice themselves, right? I also got Glittering Stockpile in here, 2 and a red, Artifact Treasure, tap, add a red, put a stash counter on Glittering Stockpile, so it's a mana rock, again, something we already need in this deck anyway, but you can also tap it and sacrifice it to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of stash counters on Glittering Stockpile. So it's just a nice mana rock that's going to fit the theme of what we're doing, right? Whenever you're building a deck, you got to put ramp in, you got to put mana rocks in, all that good stuff. So find the stuff that fits the theme of what you're doing, right? We're going to have a lot of artifacts lying around, I imagine. So Gear Per Aether Grid, I think, is a great fit here. 2 and a red enchantment, tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Gear Per Aether Grid deals 1 damage to any target. I think that's pretty handy to have on the battlefield, right? If we have a bunch of those worthless scrap tokens just hanging around, now we can tap them down to throw damage at things. Reckless Fireweaver is just an absolute must, I think, in a deck like this. 1 and a red, Human Artificer 1/3. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. Again, one of those cards that you wouldn't think red has that much support in an artifact theme, but it actually has quite a bit. And this is a fantastic one. Again, we're going to be casting lots of artifacts. We're going to be recurring them from our graveyard with our welders and our engineers. So they're going to be ETBing some more, doing damage to each of our opponents. Every time we sacrifice an artifact, it's going to create that scrap token that's entering the battlefield and is going to do 1 damage to each of our opponents. So this guy sitting on the battlefield is going to just help us close out the game a lot faster just by doing what we would normally be doing on our deck anyway, because we're going to have so many artifacts leaving and entering the battlefield. Idol of Oblivion, another great artifact. Perfect fit in this deck, of course, because we can tap it to draw a card only if we've created a token this turn. Guess what? We're going to be doing that a whole lot. This doesn't even have to be on our turn. Like I said, we can use our commander's ability on someone else's turn, sacrifice a non-token artifact, create a scrap token. Now we've created a token. We can tap this to draw a card. And of course, it's an artifact, fits the theme, and we can also sacrifice it, right? Something that people probably don't do often with their Idol of Oblivion. Pay 8 and tap it, sacrifice it, create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. So that's another thing we can do with this that also fits the theme. Animation Module. What a fantastic fit this is with a Farid deck. 1 mana artifact. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are placed on a permanent you control, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So we're putting counters on our commander, and when we do so, right, so we're going to sacrifice an artifact, put a counter on a commander. When we do so, our Animation Module triggers. We pay an extra 1, get a servo token, which of course is an artifact. So now we have have more sack fodder, I think this is a fantastic fit in this deck. We're also in the discard theme, and you know, depending on how much you use those abilities, I think will depend on the other cards that you have in play. So if I have my Surly Badgesaur or my Browlin Skyshark Rider in play, now I'm probably going to be doing the rummaging ability a lot more, right? I'm going to be doing a lot more discarding and drawing because I have these cards in play and they're giving me more benefit, right? So again, the options for our commander's ability will depend a lot on where the game is at currently, whatever the game state is, or what cards we have in play that will benefit us from using those particular abilities. We want to be putting those counters on our commander. Aki Battle Squad seems like a great fit there. 5 and a red, Goblin Samurai 6/6. Whenever one or more modified creatures you control attack, untap all modified creatures you control. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase. This ability triggers only once each turn. So if we want to put a +1/+1 counter on our commander, it is now modified, right? Our commander is going to gain menace until end of turn. It's going to make it harder to block. We can swing with it. When it attacks, we get another combat phase, so we can swing with it again. That's going to be a great way to help us close out the game. Ion Storm. Again, one of the few cards that actually fits a +1/+1 counter theme in red. There's not very many. 2 and a red enchantment. Pay 1 and a red. Remove a +1/+1 counter or charge counter from a permanent you control to deal 2 damage to any target. This is a great fit in the deck, I think. It is a little mana intensive if you have to sacrifice an artifact to put a counter on your commander, then pay 2 more mana, remove a counter, and then do 2 damage. That's like 4 mana to do 2 damage. Not great. But later in the game, maybe our commander has a bunch of counters on it, or maybe our Browlin has some counters on it, right? Don't forget, we do have other cards here. Surly Badgesaur puts counters on itself. We actually have a fair amount of creatures that are putting counters on themselves here. So it doesn't just have to be our commander. Now we can start removing those counters from our permanents to deal 2 damage to targets. I think that's pretty handy to have in the deck. And how are we going to win the game? Everyone always wants to know. Of course, I think you probably will attack with your commander a lot. Like I said, you got the Reckless Fireweaver. You do have a few different options here. I also threw Possessed Portal in the deck, a card that a lot of people absolutely loathe, I'm sure. But for me, this is a perfect fit for a card like this. Okay, so 8 mana artifact. It's expensive, but of course, we're going to use it to close out the game. If a player would draw a card, that player skips that draw instead. That's an incredibly powerful ability. It means no one gets to draw for any reason at all, ever. If your opponent draws on their turn, they skip that draw. If your opponent draws from a Heuristic Study, they skip that draw. There is no drawing going on in the game as long as this thing is in play. Now, of course, that's applied to us too. Not exactly great. What I like about it though is how it's going to benefit us. Okay, the last ability at the beginning of each end step, each player sacrifices a permanent unless they discard a card. This is very much a actual smokestack type of card where you're forcing your opponents to sacrifice all their stuff or discard all the cards in their hand. It's not necessarily going to win you the game, but it's going to give you a massive advantage, I think. And now, why is this giving us more of an advantage? Well, first of all, we have the option to discard, okay? So if we have some of our discard support here, now we can use the discard to our advantage, right? If our Browlin is in play, now when we're discarding to our Possessed Portal, we're going to get a benefit out of it, right? We're going to put counters on our Browlin and deal damage to each of our opponents. So we're getting a benefit there that our opponents aren't getting from discarding. Moreover, though, the sacrifice a permanent thing I think fits really, really well with Farid because we're getting a 2-for-1 with his ability, right? Every time we sacrifice an artifact, we're getting a scrap token. So basically, we're almost doubling up the amount of permanents that we can sacrifice. That's actually how the traditional stacks deck works. You're forcing everyone to sacrifice stuff, but you got more stuff to sacrifice than everyone else. That's how you win the game. And once your opponents have sacrificed all their lands, now we can sacrifice their Possessed Portal, right? You're allowed to sacrifice any permanent to your Possessed Portal that you want. So if at any time you're not happy with the way things are going, you just sacrifice the Possessed Portal to itself on the end step, right? So you're in complete control here. I think this is a great fit in the deck and it will help you close out the game. I really like the deck I put together here. I think it's tons of fun. Very value-y, the kind of deck that I really like. If you're interested in it, the deck list, of course, is in the description below. Feel free to check it out, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.